Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Fort County Fair. My name is Jake Miller, the director of the Cowboy Band, and the band's excited to be playing at the fair again this year for our third consecutive year in a row. We hope you enjoy the food and variety of music this evening. If you've never been to one of our concerts during the summer on Tuesday nights in Wright Park, we would love for you to come check it out in the future. We always perform classic marches, music for westerns, other famous movies, TV show, and musical pieces, and a lot of original music for concert bands. We have two more concerts this summer, with next Tuesday's concert being a musical tribute to female composers in honor of this year's Dodge City Days theme, Women of the West. You can also catch us the following Tuesday, July 29th in Wright Park for the annual Salute the Troops Dodge City Days event. And now at this time, we ask that you please rise for who's cover and look towards our American flag right here for the playing of our national anthem, followed by our state song, Home on the Range. Thank you. Thank you so much. If you didn't get the memo a few minutes ago, the hot dogs have started to be served. They're right over here on the west side under the roof where the band is. So come get your dog and your chips and water if you haven't already. We're going to begin some of our concert tonight with a playing of a piece called Aztec Fire. It's the original word for a concert band that features the sounds of majestic Spanish marches with lots of excitement and fury. With the trumpet fanfares and exciting woodwind trills, this piece is a wild ride from the start and then it roars to a powerful conclusion. Here is Aztec Fire. Thank you to all of you in the audience, and thank you to the cows. Really, we appreciate your approval. Carl King wrote over 300 compositions in his career. It could be said that King did for the Circus March what Sousa did for the Patriotic March. He seemed to like composing under pressure and often composed in tight spots, such as by oil lamp and fancy circus tents. Tonight we continue on with our concert, with perhaps his most famous circus gala called The Big Cage. It was dedicated to Clyde Beatty, the most famous lion trainer of his day, and arguably the goat of the lion trainer industry. Here is The Big Cage. This next piece is going to take all of us on a trip around the world, exploring music from various countries and different cultures. It's titled Around the World in 80 Measures. We begin and end this piece in America. See if you can identify the 17 other countries we'll be visiting by listening for the recognizable themes. This next piece is an electrifying work that was inspired by the awesome display of beauty and raw energy from a powerful thunderstorm. The aggressive parts of this composition portray the level of energy present in the storm, and there is a calmer, softer section in the middle which can happen in any real storm before the furious roars of thunder and flashing lightning return. We hope you enjoy Lightning by Todd Sculptor. This next march is another exciting composition by Carl King. It features a dark, aggressive minor key melody presented by our saxophones and low brass in the beginning, then switches moods to a much more pleasant tonality like most marches do. One of the things that makes this march interesting, especially for the musicians that rehearse and perform it, is that it doesn't ever change key signature, which is something that marches usually tend to do at least once. So here is Peacemaker March by Carl King. The band's next piece is an original lyrical piece for concert band and is a beautiful addition to any program. It was inspired by a famous bronze lullaby with many hints of it heard throughout this piece. It's not time for us to say goodbye just yet to you all, but we will now play And Goodnight by Christopher Lewis. The musical Wicked quickly became a Broadway favorite after its first premiere in 2003. The original Broadway production won 3 Tony Awards and 6 John Best Awards, and its original cast album received a Grammy. This has been a longtime favorite of the band's to play most summers, and this was a great year to bring it back, considering how well the first Wicked movie was done, and there's plenty of buzz still as we prepare for the second installment. We hope you enjoy highlights from Wicked, which include No One Mourns the Wicked, I'm Not That Girl, Defying Gravity, No Good Deed, and For Good. I'm so sorry, I always forget to recognize our amazing soloists, because we have quite a few throughout the year, and it becomes so repetitive to me that I just forget to say their names. But that was Ben Riley on the saxophone. I've seen him pick up several times this year. The band's next piece is an adventurous, it's an adventurous piece through one of Nevada's state parks called the Valley of Fire. The park is located in the Mojave Desert, located 58 miles northeast of the famous Las Vegas Strip. The Valley of Fire State Park is Nevada's oldest park and is named for its stunning red sandstone formations. At certain times of the day, when reflecting the sun's rays, these brilliant sandstone formations create the visual illusion of actually being on fire. That's kind of how they got their name a long time ago. Try to picture the beautiful landscape as the band plays They Walk in the Valley of Fire by Roland Barrett. band will now play a fun, newer Spanish march, also known as the Paso Doble, by Mexican-American composer Jorge Vargas. El Manto Dorado is fun for musicians of all ages, as it features exciting trumpet fanfares, lyrical clarinet melodies, and bass lines that mimic string instruments playing in a pizzicato style. Spanish marches are often more laid back than others, written by Sousa and Pink, and it's always enjoyable to listen for the noticeable differences across the instruments. We hope you enjoy El Manto Dorado. Before the band plays their last one of this evening, it's always fun for us to get out and play in different venues for different events around Dodge and close by areas for different occasions. So we'd just like to give a quick thank you to Jeremy Woodjack and everyone else on the Fort County Fair board and the staff who's invited us back. We love playing here for you all, and we hope you had a great time. So thank you so much for having the Cowboy band back for a third year. We appreciate it. Don't forget that the fair runs for a few days, so don't forget to stop by and check out all the different booths inside and the exciting animals and all those things that it has to offer. Our final piece for this evening features a lively tempo throughout with changing meters. The composer, Randall Sanders, a favorite of ours, is a percussionist, and many of his works like this feature lively percussion parts to complement the accented syncopated lines played by the wind players. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your time at this year's fair. We look forward to seeing you at this year's Dodge City Days events as well. This is Adrenaline Engines.